Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Advisory Committee. I'd like to get the meeting started here. It is 5:35. Jen, if you could take roll call, please.
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Bullock is not here. Mr. Smith? Here. Ms. French? Here. Ms. Lomas? Here. Ms. Weber? Here. Mr. McIntosh? Ms. Marroquin? Here. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Casebeer?
Here.
And Mr. Hotchkiss?
Here.
Thank you, Jen. We'll move on to item number 3, approval of our minutes from our January 18th, 2012 meeting.
But move to accept the draft minutes as submitted.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, moving along to item number 4. Are there any agenda adjustments, Cameron?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have 2 things. First, I would like to recognize and welcome Councilmember Frank Hotchkiss, who was recently appointed as the council liaison for the committee, and he's here tonight. He's going to sit in the audience, but we're glad to have him, so welcome, Councilmember. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is our March meeting is our regularly scheduled meeting is for the 3rd Wednesday, which is March 21st. But we have a presentation from a staff member in the Parks Division who is unavailable to give the presentation on that date. So I'm going to propose that we move the meeting up 1 week to March 14th. And we can, Madam Chair, if we want people to look at their calendars and check that now, we can. Otherwise, we will send out the notification in the future for that. Okay.
Thank you.
And that's it. Thanks.
Moving on to item number 5, is there any public comment on an item not on the agenda? Okay.
Madam Chair, I would like to note that our community liaison won a very major prize of significance, especially in the city of Santa Barbara, since our last meeting. And I was wondering if she could tell us a little bit about it, because this was a room and a dais that Harriet Miller did great things for the community for a long time.
Yes, of course. It was a really big honor for me to receive this award because it's a really competitive process, and there's plenty of seniors around Santa Barbara County who would deserve this award equally. But it's really great because I've grown up in Santa Barbara for 17 years, and I've participated in so many activities as a volunteer, as a participant, and I love what Santa Barbara does and everything it means. And so this award was really special, and so it's great to be here, and I love doing everything I do here. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, any committee member and staff communications?
No.
All right, our next item is the 2012 subcommittee appointments, and I'm going to turn this over to Cameron as well.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we can move through this item fairly quickly. As you all know, we have 2 subcommittees presently on the committee. The first is a standing committee, and that's our budget subcommittee. That committee generally meets 2 or 3 times a year. We go over the Creeks Division budget, and the committee makes recommendations to the subcommittee makes recommendations to the full committee, which makes recommendations to the Parks and Recreation Commission and to City Council regarding the Creeks Division budget. Historically, that committee has been made up of the chair and the vice chair and the immediate past chair of this committee. So the current members are Ms. Weber, Mr. Bullock, and Mr. Moldaver. And Madam Chair, if you want to make any changes, you can do that, or you can consult the committee and potentially reappoint those 3 members.
Does anyone else have interest in sitting on this committee? Okay, and I guess we need to check with Lee and Paul as well if they're willing to continue.
Be glad to continue to serve. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're good with that.
So just for the record, I think we've reappointed the three members, Ms. Weber, Mr. Bullock, and Mr. Moldaver, to the Budget Subcommittee. The other committee we have is an ad hoc committee, which is a committee that was formed, or a subcommittee that was formed by this committee for the specific purpose of assisting with review and analysis of creek and ocean water quality and restoration policies in the general plan update process. The general plan update was approved by City Council in December, and we're moving forward into a new stage of that process, which is developing the implementation measures and strategies in the general plan. Several of them pertain to water quality and restoration activities. So my recommendation was that we continue to keep that committee in place. The current members of that subcommittee are Ms. Lomas and Ms. DeSmith, and we have one vacant position on that committee. So, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to you to...
Madam Chair, given that Mr. McIntosh's day job is in another county and that Ms. French has extensive background in Plan Santa Barbara, I was wondering, would the standing committee be able to be flexible in its scheduling? Because I know her work commitments at the university are very extensive, but I think her knowledge of this process is so valuable, it would be a great asset to this subcommittee.
Thank you for consideration. I'm currently participating in the Lower Mission Creek restoration and bridge alignment efforts, and that's an ongoing process. So I'm not sure I can commit to more. Thank you, though.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone else interested? Okay. Are we okay with just 2 members on there, then reappointing? Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair. We can keep the 2 members, reappoint the 2 members to the Watershed Subcommittee and leave the 3rd seat vacant. And if either Mr. Bullock or Mr. McIntosh at a later time have interest in that, we can put this back on the agenda and reappoint to fill that seat. Of course, all the committee members will be notified and are welcome to come to any of those meetings as well.
Thank you. Moving on to our business items, I'm going to turn this over to Cameron, and we'll have a presentation on the Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This, as Ms. French mentioned, this is an ongoing city project to replace the Mason Street Bridge over Mission Creek. The committee has had this on the agenda several times in the past, and the project is going before the Historic Landmarks Commission for design review. Ms. French has been appointed by the committee to be the liaison for that process, and Mr. Moldaver is the backup liaison. And at our last meeting, we had a discussion about this project, and the committee requested that Mr. Wozniak, principal engineer with the city's Public Works Department, come back to talk about some changes to the bridge since the last time he was here and answer some specific questions that the committee had. So I will turn it over to Mr. Wozniak. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Good evening, Madam Chair, committee members, guests. My name is John Wozniak, Principal Civil Engineer, Public Works Department, and here to update you on the latest design changes for the Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project. As you may know, we have been before the Historic Landmarks Commission, and we will be returning there on February 29th for design review. Quick recap is that we have, it's a complex project, the Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project. It's part of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, and it is a standalone project that has primarily funded by grant funds. And so it's clear that there are competing needs and desires between staff, boards, and commissions and adjacent property owners, and staff is proposing a balanced project approach that meets the federal, state, city requirements while responding to all these stakeholders. This plan shows the latest design that we have, and it reflects the alignment of the bridge. And it's critical to establish and have the western bridge alignment established because it's the foundation for the project, and it drives the geometry of the bridge and of the realignment of the intersection of Mason Street and Kimberly. And so with that alignment, there's been the challenge of how do we deal with the existing sycamore tree. And that existing sycamore tree is shown as the outline of it in this vicinity right here. And it's in direct conflict with the alignment of the channel wall for the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project. And we had looked extensively as methods and issues associated with protecting the tree or realigning the bridge to accommodate the tree. And so we have done a lot of research with regards to that, and there are several factors that contribute to the solution that we are recommending. So with this alignment, this is the alignment of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project, and it's a requirement to have 55 feet of channel width at this location. So the width or the width or the span of the bridge would be 55 feet. What's of importance to the boards and commissions that we have been talking to is this habitat expansion zone and the availability of space to maximize the habitat expansion zone. And I'll explain that, I'll elaborate on that a little bit more when we look at the cross sections. And so another key element of the project is the width of Kimberly Avenue. Actually, it's avenue, not street. And how that plays into the design. Further, this property on this corner is in for a development for a hotel site by the property owner, and it will be a requirement of this project to have a take of this a portion of this property. And so we've met with this property owner and we've been working with them to minimize the take but yet meet their needs of their project as they have space and room requirements for this hotel site. And so staff has had the challenge of minimizing this width of street so that we can support the operations within the neighborhood and within this project. And so we have made a determination that this road width will need to be 26 feet. And that's a determination that we've made based on geometry that is needed for operational needs, traffic issues, site distance issues that are needed because this bridge is slightly elevated more than it is down and beside it on Mason Street. So there are requirements and standards that need to be upheld. And so we have evaluated this, and that there's been some discussion regarding one-way traffic to try in an attempt to minimize the width of the street. And we have looked at that extensively. Want to keep in mind that the existing width of Kimberly and through the remaining loop of this area is approximately 34 feet. The road width around Chapala is approximately 34 feet. So this is just a bottleneck, so to speak, or a necking down of a roadway to a minimum that staff can support. And staff can support a 26-foot wide road here. Some have commented that if you make it a one-way street, you could get down to 20 feet. So that's a difference of 6 feet of what we're talking about. And 6 feet would not be enough space to add the level of protection to the tree that would be necessary to protect the tree in accordance with the arborist reports that we've had. And so we have determined that this road needs to be 26 feet to not preclude two-way flow. So we are not saying that it's not possible to do one way. It certainly is possible to do one way, but this is not this project. This project is accommodating the traffic needs for this project and what we believe will be the traffic needs for future projects, as this bridge is intended to be here for possibly hundreds of years. Current bridges that we are replacing have lasted approximately 100 years. These will be seismically upgraded to last, we hope, at least that, if not longer. And so we have some tough decisions, as I've mentioned before, with regards to balancing the needs of the project and balancing the needs of the stakeholders and the issues at hand. And so the alignment of this, western alignment of the bridge and the abutment is critical to how this plays out. And so we've made the determination, based on all the information that we had and the evaluations that we've done, is that we are just recommending that the tree be replaced because it will be impacted by any construction of this bridge that occurs, because we do have to have the 55-foot wide bridge. It is at this location. It will impact the tree, which is only feet away from the existing abutment. The existing abutment will require removal. A new creek wall will be going exactly in the alignment of the new tree. So if the bridge project doesn't take this tree out, the next reach that is coming between the PED bridge that is just downstream of this bridge, the next reach of the Lower Mission Creek flood control project, creek wall is in direct alignment with the tree. And in talking with flood control and other project entities, that tree will likely not survive. And so we are planning for its replacement. We have 12 sycamore trees planned to be replaced, to be placed on this project in mitigation. We have worked with this property owner, Mr. Roma Sonda, the Harborview Inn, and he has agreed to allow 5 sycamore trees, 2 in the direct vicinity of the existing tree and 3 along the western bank of the tree on his property. And that's a very appreciative gesture on his part as we're working with him cooperatively on this property, 16 West Mason, kitty corner to his other property. And so there's a balancing act is what I'm trying to portray here, is that we're trying to balance the needs of getting the project done. Again, this is an approximately $11 million project, almost all funded, 99% funded by the federal government highway bridge program, and we are trying to do our best efforts to do a project that is in balance with the needs and requirements. So with regards to bridge width, we are further studying at the request of the boards and commissions if it's possible to even reduce this 36-foot width paved area to something less. And we are actively pursuing that, and we believe that we can support a 32-foot wide width to meet the design criteria that is set by the federal and state regulations. And so we are actively pursuing a 32-foot, so a further reduction of 4 feet to this alignment. Since I presented to the Creeks Committee last, we have moved this south side of the bridge 6 feet inward or northward. And we've been able to narrow that previous 60-foot wide bridge to 54 feet. We're trying to narrow it yet another 4 feet if we can get an approval to have the paved width be 32 feet. There are requirements for the paved widths approaching the bridge from each side, and that's what we're dealing with, is standards and requirements that can allow us to build this bridge and have it federally funded. And so what has resulted from that 6-foot movement of the bridge to the north on the south railing or south side is that has enabled us to capture approximately 240 square feet of additional habitat expansion zone in this vicinity. We've been working with the Creeks staff to get the maximum habitat expansion zone that is feasible for this site. And if we can move that bridge another 4 feet, we would further expand that yet another 4 feet, which would equate to, it's about 42 feet long, so that would equate to another 80 square feet of space. So with that, I'd like to move forward and show you. Okay. Yeah, I'll move it along. There's a committee member that may need to leave soon, so I'm going to try and move it along. This is a section that you have seen through the habitat expansion zone, and it has the features, I believe, that have been determined to be desirable, which is the emergent wetland, the slope that would survive with the vegetation proposed, and it's an opportunity for the animals and the vegetation to thrive. This is a new section that looks as if you were in a kayak in the creek, you could look at this section, which shows the habitat expansion zone on the right There would be a wall adjacent to the bridge that would be necessary to uphold the road adjacent to that, but that's what that would look like. Now I'd like to show you the sections that are on the north through Kimberly Road area, and there's been discussion about maximizing the slope to the north. Obviously, we don't have the space here on the north side that we do have on the south side to have that terraced slope that is desirable at the habitat expansion zone to the south. And so walking through those sections, this is a section 3 that is closest to the bridge that incorporates this storm drain manhole that is needed because there's an existing 54-inch storm drain pipe that comes down on Kimberly Avenue and then needs to discharge before the bridge. And so we have to accommodate that structure, and that's what that section, and that's what dictates the necessity for a vertical wall element here. It's because we need to have a structure in this location. This is a little further north where we're transitioning from that manhole area to lowering the wall, creek wall. And so there's a transition that's made between the proposed sidewalk on Kimberly, a 2-to-1 slope, and that gets us to this wall height in this location is approximately 10 feet. The maximum wall height, by the way, was about 14 feet adjacent to the bridge. And then we transition right to where there's no wall as part of the design. So that in previous discussions, there was discussion about this existing gabion wall that exists in the field that currently exists, where our project doesn't get to that point. So we need to have a transition between the proposed vertical wall and the existing gabion wall. And this is a section of what that would look like. It would have a slope. We'd likely have a fence in here somewhere to prevent people from getting into the creek. But it is a 2-to-1 slope, so it goes right from the back of the sidewalk down to near water level at the creek. And so this is a look at that if you were in a kayak in Mission Creek looking through this right-hand side, which would be the habitat expansion zone to the south of the bridge. This is the bridge. And then we have the retaining wall that's necessary to transition down to no wall, which is a transition to the future habitat expansion zone when the next REACH project continues on upstream of this project. Now, this habitat expansion zone in the future will emulate this habitat expansion zone. It'll be slightly smaller, but it will be very similar. And in a way that we can start this habitat expansion zone similar to how we've started this one, this wall height has to come down. So that's why this location of the manhole was determined to be preferable to a location upstream as previously we were asked to explore. So we factored in what we believe is the best current and future design for this project. So this is the opposite side. If we flipped or turned our kayak 180 degrees and we looked on the west section, it's wall because we don't have property acquisition on that side of the project. And we have downstream, we'd have the Roma-Sana property, and upstream we have 20 West Mason, which is the blue house in the opening photo, which the city will be acquiring but protecting in place. So with that, I know that I have provided a list of the HLC, the Historic Landmarks Commission motions from the last 2 meetings as a handout. And on the back of that, there is a summary of what I believe or I understood to be the comments and recommendations from the Creeks Advisory Committee. So with that, I take any questions, and we go back to HLC on 2 weeks from today on February the 29th for a preliminary approval. And again, the critical component of this is that we need to have the western abutment alignment and the geometry of the bridge established so that we can move forward with the next step in the design process.
Thank you very much, Sean. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the update. I really appreciate it. And I know in our last meeting, we as a committee wanted to collect our recommendations and get them in writing prior to the HLC meeting. So since I do need to leave early, I'd like to ask staff to prepare the notes from today in letter form for us to review before that distribution.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes, I have a question. One of the items, number 3, on the construct at the foot of the habitat expansion zone should include Tidewater Goby habitat. How do you propose to incorporate Tidewater Goby habitat and resting areas in this design?
Sorry, we haven't got into the specific, this isn't final design by any means. This is a preliminary design such that we can move forward to hire the consultant to do final design. So that's, in order to do that, we need to get these key elements, which are geometry, and that we don't have any major obstacles that we can't overcome. So any of those design details, we'd be happy to study them, incorporate the direction for the boards and commissions, but we do need to move forward with those key elements so that we can get to answer some of those questions on details. So I don't have an answer exactly how to do that, but we certainly will find out.
Thank you. My recommendation is to kind of look at the options before you finalize your draft design, so you don't put anything into the design that would preclude you from adding the habitat for the goby. Thank you.
Yes. In the HLC recommendations, they talk about providing shade from these newly planted sycamore trees in lieu of taking out the 100-year-old sycamore tree. And I notice on the plant schedule that the proposed new trees would be 24-inch box. What height might those trees be when they're planted, coming out of a 24-inch box? Do you?
Madam Chair, Mr. Casepier, I don't know the height. We don't have our staff here that would be more familiar with that. But one of the things that we are doing is that we are starting the propagation of the existing tree. So that existing tree would be propagated. It can't be transplanted. It just won't survive. So we're going to propagate this tree, and so we'll start plantings on-site and off-site. And so what we would do is give the tree the best ability to survive to the existing conditions. We believe that, we understand that to be the formula for success for the trees. And so I don't have an answer for the height, but I can tell you that the methodology here is to propagate the tree as soon as possible. The construction of this project isn't scheduled until the spring of 2014. So we can have a 2-year, plus the duration of the construction contract, probably a year. So we have like a 3-year head start on propagating trees and to get them to be growing now instead of waiting for the project to be completed.
Thank you.
A question on your comment about the width of Kimberly when you were analyzing whether it could be a one-way street. You said that the difference between one-way and two-way would be 6 feet. Is that right?
That's correct.
But that the 6 feet based on the arborist report wouldn't be enough to preserve the sycamore tree.
That's correct.
In moving over the eastern edge
That's
of the
right.
canal. So based on the arborist report or your own data, is there a width for the street or an encroachment on that lot that's on the corner that would preserve the tree?
There are dimensions in the arborist report that they identified. They identified 12 feet in the 12 feet away from the bridge abutment and 8 feet away from the creek wall. What that does, one of the repercussions of implementing those strategies, as the arborist has indicated, was that it would be a significant reduction of the habitat expansion zone. As we've seen through this cross-section of the habitat expansion zone, that this only occurs in the meat of the area. So when we look at that habitat expansion zone, that cross-section is occurring here through the meat of this triangle. So when we shrink that triangle by, say, 6 or 8 feet or 12 feet, this area significantly gets reduced. And we are hearing that even a 6-foot expansion of this zone is important. So imagine losing, say, 8 or 12 feet of this edge. It would be it wouldn't be a very, I've been told, it wouldn't be a very effective habitat expansion zone if we shrink it. And so that was just one more of the contributing factors that we evaluated when we looked at the big picture items of geometry, project key issues. And another factor was simply that take on the 20 West Mason property. That's a significant issue that we have to factor in. We're trying to cooperatively work with that applicant, and we're trying to effectively deal with all the key issues that we're hearing in all the boards and commissions. Does that help?
Yes, very much. And so that I understand the numbers, you think it would either be 8 or 12 feet needed?
Can I clarify that?
Yes.
Because in the Arborist report, even if we get 8 and 12 feet away, the tree has 5 trunks. The largest trunk is a 30-inch trunk that leans at a 45-degree angle over Mission Creek and would need to be removed no matter what. So the tree would be significantly compromised no matter what we do. And so in looking at what that tree would effectively be after we're done, there's no assurance that we would be able to save the tree no matter what we do, because of its proximity to the existing bridge and because of its proximity to the new bridge and the new reach that is coming to match the new bridge. So for those reasons that we've evaluated moving the abutment over to cantilever and creative things, they just don't pencil out, quite frankly, and the alignment of that abutment is critical to the geometry of the project.
One follow-up, the width of the habitat expansion zone through the meat that you were talking about is what?
This is approximately 42 feet at the top end. And so it goes down to 0, so somewhere in there is the middle of that dimension. So that section through here gives us that section gives us an idea of what that would look like. And this, there's concern about this being a steep slope, and we have it shown here as a 2-to-1 slope, which is the cutting edge of where it can sustain itself with good vegetation. So we're trying to just maximize that space so it can be effective.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Moldaver, did you have a comment?
Madam Chair, I wanted to clarify something on what I understood as the committee's request to consider narrowing Kimberly Street, and I think it was, I think that specific request was linked not to the sycamore tree on the downstream side of the bridge, but to opening up the possibility that would allow for a sloped bank on the upstream side of the bridge near Kimberly Avenue, instead of having the vertical wall up there. If the road were narrowed or moved off the creek a little bit, it would allow for a sloped bank there. And so I think that's, I think that issue is getting confused. That was the focus, I think, of the committee's comment.
Mr. Moldaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, since she had to leave, I want to extol again the excellent work that Ms. French has done representing our committee before the HLC in multiple meetings. She's been a terrific ambassador. And I want to thank Mr. Wozniak for his 5th presentation. And, in jazz, some people, as they sing the same song over time, they vary the lyrics a little bit. But I think your phrasing, sticking with the original language of your department's proposal over and over is very impressive. And finally, I was really, really impressed that the property owners at the corner of Kimberly, who are so famous for being reclusive and introverted, as well as for their altruism and civic philanthropy, that you were able to get them to discuss the road width and their future development plans with you, because I mean, they're right up there with Emily Dickinson. They don't share their ambitions with many people. That being said, as a former member of the National Safety Council and as the former chair of the original City Transportation Committee 30 years ago, I would respectfully disagree with the message that you bring from your department about the necessity for the width of the Mason Street Bridge and the width of Kimberly Street. Having spent 3 days at a Caltrans intersection design workshop that was co-sponsored by DOT and Caltrans in San Luis, some of the warrants and specs that they discussed were at odds with what your department is proposing. Be that as it may, that's a job for the Transportation and Circulation Committee. Our responsibility, as I understand it, is water quality and habitat for Mission Creek. It's not design width, it's not development, it's, not one-way streets or two-way streets. And I think most of the suggestions that we've made, and I hope you relay them to Mr. Kelly and to Ms. Anderson, are basically how can we get the best job for a living, dynamic, attractive creek that will not only support fish and plants and wildlife, but be the kind of place that visitors who come to town and who fund Measure B would enjoy walking near or looking over the bridge and looking down at. And my concern there is that with all your eloquence, the amount of steep walls as opposed to slopes is still excessive. The width of Mason Street, not the length of the bridge, but the width of the street is still excessive. And I want to make clear to people who are watching at home that the wider the bridge, the poorer the habitat and the water quality beneath it, and the greater potential for vandalism, which has been an ongoing problem for years. And I would also like to point out, of course, that when choices have to be made, the choice to make Kimberly Street wider, whether it's one-way or two-way, and to move that extra width to the left, to the west, rather than to the right, obviously is a benefit for your legal department in terms of dealing with the property owner, but it's a clear detriment for the wall, for the creek habitat, for the water quality, and for all the things that this committee is being asked by the Council and the Planning Commission to advise them on. And I think that the reason that HLC, and as you know, I've only been to one of the meetings, has asked you to come back with more ideas repeatedly, is that even though their thing is supposed to be the design and the appearance and the historic value, that they're having some of the same concerns. And with regard to the development potential of other properties, I was privileged to serve when Harriet Miller was mayor on the Downtown Waterfront Visioning Group, which was a cross-section of about 120 community and civic leaders. And the key thing about their report was that they wanted the waterfront to be visitor-friendly but locally oriented. And if you were to move beyond the bridge and go further down Mason Street, the whole dynamic of foot traffic and car traffic in the West Beach area, once you get off of Cabrillo Boulevard, is at a different pace and scale to what you're imagining for the future of this bridge in Kimberly. And so I really, really appreciate your taking dinner time to come and share with us your latest thinking, but I'm still concerned about the width of the bridge, the width of Kimberly, its orientation to the west, not only the loss of the heritage sycamore tree, which is a favorite with visitors for the last 50 years, but also with the wall and the habitat issues in the creek. And so I hope between now and the time that we get to go back to HLC, maybe that there's even a little bit more that we can do to make an essential and necessary project that's being federally funded even a little bit better, for which Santa Barbara has always been known, not going for the minimum design standard, but for the best that we could afford. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, Cam?
I was just going to look for one other clarification. I know that I've heard now from the committee several times about a desire to come up with a design that narrows the bridge, the Mason Street Bridge, and we've seen it get narrower. One of the issues that's been raised with regard to the funding for the bridge, I understand, is that the bridge, the road width on the bridge may need to be the same width as the road approaching the bridge on either side. Some questions have come up from this committee and from the HLC about where do you measure the width of the road that's approaching the bridge. And my understanding is that you can't see it on this slide, but Mason Street comes up into State Street just a little bit further to the right side of that slide. My understanding is that under the approved design for the La Entrada project, the width of the throat of Mason Street at State Street is 28 feet. 28 feet. And so we have a 28-foot opening at State Street, but a 36-foot wide road width at the bridge. And so I don't know. I don't
Chair,
know
if I may, I'd
answer-
like to clarify that because there are several things going on. There's the La Entrada project, which has been approved, and that we are meeting actually with them, in progress of meeting, to have their construction drawings revised, because they need to be revised in accordance with the substantial conformance determination to allow them to construct half of the State Street improvements, or the west half of State Street improvements, from the railroad bridge on State Street down to the State Street Bridge at Mission Creek. That being said, the width of Mason Street as a result of that project will change from an existing width of approximately 38 feet to a narrowed width of a 36-foot, which is city standard width. The throat is anticipated to be 28 feet, but that's not driving the width of Mason Street. What's driving the width of Mason Street is our city standard street width, which is 36 feet. The right-of-way width is 60 feet. 36-foot centered roadway width leaves us with two 12-foot sidewalks on each side. So the narrowed road to what exists today from 38 to a proposed 36 will allow for wider sidewalks as a result of the La Entrada project. So because these projects are in close proximity, they need to be matching up. And so that drives the 36-foot wide road here on Mason Street. We have an existing 39, I believe, feet wide Mason Street on the west side of the bridge. So you've got 38, 39-foot road widths that exist there now. Staff is recommending and requiring their Entrada project to make this to 36 feet, narrowing the road. And Mr. Benson is correct in that it is a federal requirement for the travel way to be, the bridge to be the same width as the travel way. There are exceptions, and the HLC has asked us to please, please, please go and see what you can do to make this bridge the narrowest that it can be. And we are doing that. And as a matter of fact, as I opened my presentation, I made known that we are actively pursuing that, and we have found that there may be an ability to narrow this bridge to a 32-foot wide road, even though these are proposed 36-foot wide. So we're doing everything that we can to narrow this bridge. I believe we're doing everything we can to narrow this bridge, but to meet the federal and state requirements because this project is funded by that. If we don't meet those requirements, we don't meet the funding. And even if there was a gray area that we would, there's a risk that we may be taking, because even though we construct something narrower on the cutting edge of it, in the future we risk that this structure being new and functionally obsolete, and that can happen. And we've been told that can happen, and we want to avoid that risk. So it's, again, a balancing act as what we're trying to do with the existing constraints, with the design criteria, and with the desires of the boards and commissions, and we also try and work with the property owners. So there's no easy answer to this, folks, and it's I believe we're doing our best. at least I've made a commitment to do my best on this project to get this city to meet the desires and requirements of the boards and commissions. But I can tell you, I can't get blood from the stone. I can't make this narrower than it can be. Then the federal government will support it.
Mr. Moldaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wasiak. I think your energy and diligence working to get state and federal highway money for necessary projects is justly esteemed throughout the entire South Coast area. It's my understanding that, first of all, that Congresswoman Capps or Senator Boxer, who's senior on the Senate Transportation Committee, have the right to request of Secretary LaHood to consider a waiver or a modification of the federal guidelines. But I was also more interested in, if I understood you right, you'd indicated that the original design of the approved Entrada project was at 28 feet, and that was what they were proposing to build. And that was what they were originally required to build?
Sure. If I could, the plans that were approved for the La Entrada project had an alignment, had actually, I think it was like a 24-foot throat width that doesn't meet current standards. Those plans were, I believe, approved in 2003 or 4. And so we have turning radius requirements for vehicles on our intersections. And so the current requirement is for it to be a minimum of 28 feet. But in addition to the throat width, there is the paved width, which is the traveled way, and the parking. And so parking comes into play into the equation. And so with the new design, there will be currently there's perpendicular parking on Mason Street, just west of State Street. And in the new design, there would be perpendicular parking on Mason Street on both sides. So we would have two 11-foot travel way lanes and two 7-foot wide parking lanes to comprise the paved width.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. So it sounds like Mr. Dayton made a significant error in judgment when he asked the council to approve the 24 feet. But it also sounds like since the developer of Entrada was good to go with the 24 feet and that moving it out to the width you're discussing is to make it just consistent with the overall city standard, that when this project comes back to the council might have the right to, again, if they chose, to waive that. But I'd like to reemphasize again that the interest in the street and the design and the funding for our committee has to be parenthetical, and that our mission is actually what's the best we can do for the water quality and the flood protection and the habitat value of the creek for the residents and the visitors who pay for Measure B. And I think these other things are tangential except when they affect that area. So again, I really appreciate your spending your dinner hour with us to try to educate us on this.
Madam Chair, may I please address the comment made about the retaining wall, the creek wall that is adjacent to the bridge, because there appears to be more discussion and a desire to not have a wall. But I can tell you that a wall is necessary. It's not that we are choosing to put a wall there because of other reasons, but it's a necessity to have a wall in that location, in this location here, which is adjacent to the bridge. And there's several factors to that. Just as we have a wall here on the south side to accommodate this habitat expansion zone, it also holds up the road. And so we have a similar situation here where we don't have enough slope. If this is a 14-foot height and it's adjacent to the sidewalk by only a matter of feet, it would be a very, very steep slope, which I don't believe is what's being desired here. Let's go to that section. Let's go to that section, and then we can address it. Okay, so here we are at the bridge, and we have in this location a vertical wall right here at this bridge and a wall back here to accommodate the habitat expansion zone. So moving to the north, adjacent to this bridge and not far from this wall is the road, is Kimberly. And so there's only a matter of, I don't know what the dimension is, maybe 6-8 feet between the edge of the creek and the back of the sidewalk. And so if we had a slope in this location, it would be extremely steep. Plus, we have to outlet this manhole as it currently goes down. It currently outlets down on this side of the bridge. So we're going to abandon this section of pipe through here and outlet the manhole upstream at the most appropriate location, and we've determined that to be in this location. So we have several components of why a wall is here and necessary, and we've done what we can in this transition zone to provide a slope similar to slopes in the vicinity and also to accommodate a very important future habitat expansion zone in the next reach of the project. And so a wall is necessary is what I'm trying to explain here. And we're trying to minimize the height of the wall by reducing it to where it gets down to as low as feasible to transition to rock, which then has to, at a time being, tie into the existing gabion walls that exist there that are beyond this project limits. So I feel like we're doing what we can. I'd certainly appreciate any comments or suggestions of how we could do this better. I just don't know how.
The point of the clarification was the idea was that if Kimberly were narrowed or moved to the east or the sidewalk on the creek side were removed, that would give you the space to have a sloped bank. And it's the width of Kimberly, the proximity to the creek, the sidewalk that creates the constraint that requires the vertical wall. And I think, we've heard I think the explanation of and the determination of the width of Kimberly and the location and the competing interests there. I was just making the clarification that it wasn't related to the tree and the abutment on the west bank, but on the downstream side, but rather the slope and to allow for the possibility of a slope bank on the upstream side, right up there.
Madam Chair, in response to that, the way that we get a sloped area here is to move this road significantly further to the east. And then we are into a real big discussion item with the developer on the take. So there's an expense involved there for the acquisition. And then there would be a lot of discussion about how much, if any, we can negotiate or take from that property to obtain a sufficient space to do a sloped terrace. What we've done here, too, by the way, is that on Kimberly, we have a parkway and a sidewalk beyond the curb. So what we've done is we used to have a design that has showed parkway next to the road, but we flipped the parkway to the creek side and put the sidewalk adjacent to the street to maximize this greener space. And so we're trying to look at what we can do within those existing design parameters and those constraints. So this site is heavily constrained. And so this is our recommendation to have that balanced project to meet the site constraints. And I know that we won't be able to satisfy everyone, but we're certainly trying to do our best to address the issues and to be as responsive as we can to those issues.
Mr.
Mr. Wozniak, I wanted to explore this idea of, it's like we're trying to force the width of this bridge into a quaint, charming neighborhood. And this isn't a freeway overpass. This is a residential, quiet, peaceful area. Now, granted, La Entrada will be developed, or this stretch of State Street will be developed at some point down the road. But if my memory serves me correctly, one of the major conditions of this development is the construction of a multi-level parking lot across the street on the north side of State Street that will accommodate hundreds of automobiles. So why do we have to widen this bridge for 7 feet, 8 feet on each side, 14 to 16 feet to accommodate 6 or 8 parking spaces for 6 or 8 cars, which expands the visual impact of the bridge. It impacts the sycamore tree, impacts everything. If the bridge ended up being 14 feet narrower without the parking, accommodating pedestrian sidewalks and the street, wouldn't it be a much more user-friendly project? Mr. Wozniak?
Madam Chair, Mr. Casebeer, the parking per se, I believe, is not driving the width of the bridge. The width of the bridge is being driven by the requirements of the federal and state, federal government and the state with regards to the traveled way, which includes the parking of the road of Mason Street on each side of the bridge. So we do have a part of the, Mason Street outside of the project limits of this bridge replacement project exists at 38 and 39 feet wide on each side of the bridge. So we have existing constraints that we are required to match to have this project be federally funded. The approach widths to the bridge are a factor in the bridge width design. And we are trying to get an exception so that we can have it be as narrow as allowable. So it's not necessarily parking driven, it's existing configuration driven, which doesn't change as a result. Well, this width just west of the bridge is not going to change, and that is considered the approach width by the state. So we have asked those questions, and we have seen the criteria by which they make those determinations, and we have concluded that the traveled way width to meet the federal requirements could potentially be reduced by 4 more feet to what we're proposing today. But that is it.
But you could ask for an exemption, as Mr. Moldiver was. Isn't it true that projects like this have exemptions?
Staff will pursue the narrowest bridge that will be allowed.
And would you ask for an exemption to narrow the bridge, removing the parking?
I am willing to do that, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Benson?
Thank you. Just a question going back to the travel way at State Street at 28 feet. I think the reason for that is you have curb extensions coming out that narrows the throat of the road, and then the road widens out so that you can have parking on both sides of the street. So I wonder if it's possible to have those same extensions off of the Kimberly Street sidewalk on the north and off of the sidewalk on what would be the south side of Mason Street to come up and mirror that 28-foot span so that the road width approaching the bridge is then 28 feet, and you pick up those extra 4 feet, and it's in compliance with the guideline that you mentioned.
Madam Chair, Mr. Benson, we could explore that, but I expect the answer is that narrowing for a few feet isn't the driving force. The traveled way is what is the paved width that's approaching the bridge, and so those curb extension. We could explore that, but I expect the answer would not be that, or would be that it wouldn't meet the criteria that is needed for that type of a determination to narrow the bridge.
Okay, I guess in the language of travelway, if you have 7 feet parking on both sides, then that 14 feet is not really a travelway. It's a parking area, and the travelway is narrowed by that space.
We've confirmed that the definition of traveled way includes the traffic lane and the parking space. That's just the definition that we have been told that we need to abide by.
And you've indicated that you're going to follow up with a request to do away with the parking. Is that true?
I didn't hear that. The request to do away with parking, I think that's a lot more complicated than it would appear. And we don't have a parking structure built, and we anticipate that will happen, but we have no assurance that is going to happen at this point in time.
But presently, there's no parking on this bridge.
That's correct, and there's no parking proposed on the bridge either on the new bridge.
Well, then why would you need, am I missing something here?
It's a requirement. That's all I can tell you is that in order for us to get this project approved, we have to meet the federal requirements.
And you're not willing to question the federal requirements?
We have questioned the federal requirements extensively, and we
On
are...
this bridge specifically?
Yes, on this bridge specifically, we have, and we continue to work towards the goal of getting the narrowest bridge that will be approved.
Could we see that correspondence?
Be happy to share with you anytime.
You do have correspondence?
Absolutely. I might even have
Okay.
some with me, but
Can we do one final comment here, and then I'd like to go to public comment? Mr. Smith, did you have a final?
Yes, thanks. The current height of the walls north of Mason on the east side in Section 1, they right now are based on a width of Kimberly Street of what?
26 feet.
Okay. So what height reduction on the walls would be allowed if you were to use a 20-foot width on Kimberly?
That would equate to approximately, that would be inches.
How many?
I think of it in just a second. It's a matter of inches. It's 6 feet at 2%.
Is it something you could get us in?
Right, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, that's not correct. 2 to 1 slope is what we should be using there. So 3 feet. 3 feet, but again, that the section through the manhole isn't governed by the width issue. I mean, there is the manhole issue that plays into the need for the height of the wall.
We do have one member of the public that would like to speak. Eddie Harris, if you'd like to come forward.
My name's Eddie Harris, President of Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about this item, Mason Street Bridge. Urban Creeks Council feels that the bridge design should reflect the strong desire of the community to enhance creeks and ocean water quality and to enhance, preserve, and make better the habitat for fish and animals and birds, especially in this part of the creek where there is a lot of degradation. A lot of good things can be done through this process and other processes that are going on in that area. We would like to see a design for this bridge that minimizes the bridge width in order to minimize the impacts on habitat and enhance the aquatic habitat. We support the strong investigation of the possibility of a one-way street for Kimberly. I think we're talking about inches and feet here, but wherever we can recover some space that can be used to effectively enhance the resources, I think it's time and money well spent. It's going to pay off. Even feet and inches where trees and other vegetation can be placed will make a difference. So please investigate every possibility that there is to see that a one-way street for that portion of minimal width for that portion of Kimberly will pay off. We want to see that large sycamores and native vegetation are maintained with the loss of the sycamore tree. One of the most valuable aspects of that tree is shading for the creek. Widening the creek results in the creation of a problem. It's harder to shade the creek when you widen it. So on both sides of the creek, adequate shading needs to be planned for. One of the things we like about this project is the habitat expansion zone on the east side of the creek. But it appears that some of the constraints are going to jeopardize shading and habitat on the west side. So there's a need there to really explore this and to look at ways to adequately shade that part of the creek. Fish, the tidewater goby, and also steelhead depend on temperatures that are in a safe, in a proper range. And the city's made a major commitment and is spending quite a bit of money on removing steelhead barriers upstream. So it's very important that this be looked at in a comprehensive connection with those changes upstream and to make sure that the habitat at this location is going to support fish and support aquatic life where they may need to take refuge or they may need to spend some time in this part of the creek waiting for their chance to move upstream. And so these are the reasons why I'm here. And a couple other points I'd like to make is that along with the discussion on the making Kimberly a one-way, of course this makes it possible if we have the room to make sloped banks where perhaps in that area, that part of the creek there along Kimberly. So we would like to see that happen. And I think I've covered all my points here. So I will stop with that. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Harris, Mr. Wasiak's explanation of Kimberly, I think, has indicated, and very rightly, that the issue isn't the one-way or the two-way, but the total width of the improved street and whether the realignment and the street improvements are angled to the west towards the creek bank, where they might affect the shade on the slope, or towards the east where they might affect an interested property owner. So was your interest that it be one way, but with the alignment that's been recommended to the west, or is it that you'd rather prefer a narrower street oriented further away from the creek bank?
That's right. I'd like to see the realignment farther from the creek in order to enhance opportunities there for vegetation and a slope bank.
And given that Mr. Wasiak is here to try to get advice and feedback from the committee as well as I imagine the public, did you have any specific suggestions for things that he or we could explore that go beyond the very extensive catalog of investigations that he's already undertaking? Something specific that hasn't been raised yet.
No, I don't. I'm just here to lend support for those modifications to this design that would enhance the opportunity for improved habitat. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments from the committee?
Madam Chair, I was asked at the beginning of this item to take some notes and so that I could prepare a letter. So I think the committee, because this item is on the agenda for action, needs to make a motion and see what is included in that. I'd be happy to read the notes as I have them. I think I just was trying to kind of capture them by issues, not necessarily specifics, and there were a lot of questions in there that might have been comments, so it was a little hard for me to decide to determine whether they were questions or comments. So let me try to run down a list. It looks like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points here, and then you all can decide what you want to include or whether I've missed something. The first comment I heard was as the bridge design is moving forward, look at options for adding tidewater goby habitat. I think that's probably throughout the project area, and to look for those opportunities early so that the design doesn't preclude adding that type of habitat later on. That's the first one. The next thing was a question regarding the size of the replacement sycamore trees, and I think that maybe I'm reading too much into the question. I think the question was an interest in larger size trees to provide more shade for the creek quickly.
I think that's right. I don't think you were reading too far into it.
Okay. There were a lot of questions and comments regarding the width of Kimberly Avenue, and I think that it sounded like there was still a desire to see Kimberly Avenue narrowed further than the 26 feet. There was a comment that the use of vertical walls and the width of the bridge is still excessive, and the width of the bridge itself is still excessive. There was a comment that this suggestion to slope the bank on the upstream side of the bridge near Kimberly, a suggestion to eliminate parking on the bridge, a suggestion to request an exemption from the federal government in order to allow for a narrower bridge, and then lastly, that the bridge should reflect the character of the neighborhood, and that the size and scale of the bridge is too large for that neighborhood.
I would just also like to add the piece about narrowing the width of Kimberly could be accomplished by removing the sidewalk on the creek side of Kimberly.
I do have one question on that. I think it was item number 6 that we had in there regarding parking on the bridge. And I believe that was clarified that there is no parking on the bridge?
That's correct. That's correct. Presently or in the future, there's no parking, there's no design for parking on the bridge. If there was parking on the bridge, by the way, the sidewalk widths would be needing to be increased as in accordance with our circulation element. So that's one of the reasons why we're saying in order to get the narrowest bridge that we can get approved, we need to have the narrowest sidewalks, which means no parking on the bridge. That's what drives the no parking on the bridge.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
May I address that sidewalk and Kimberly issue? Because we do have an existing sidewalk on Kimberly just upstream or north of this project. And so by not providing sidewalk on that side where sidewalk exists, I'm just unclear a little bit of if that's really understood or is the intention of your recommendation, because we do have existing sidewalk on both sides of the street. So it would be odd to not have sidewalk for this project and have sidewalk everywhere else on both sides of the street on this street.
Now, Madam Chair, I appreciate Mr. Wozniak standing up for the spirit of Drew Van Hingel since she's no longer here. But I would imagine that with the applicant's proposal for the steeper vertical walls in that area and with the applicant's desire to develop the property on the other side of Kimberly, wouldn't it make it more sense for the applicant to have a fully improved sidewalk for entrance and egress to their property and also get pedestrians away from the hazard of the wall that the applicant is proposing along Kimberly? So I think there'd still be some sidewalk capacity there. It's just the question is, would it be on the creek side of Kimberly or on the State Street side of Kimberly? And how wide would that sidewalk have to be? And I imagine that could probably enter into the extensive negotiations that your department's already having with that property owner.
Madam Chair and Mr. Moldaver, as shown on the section here, we have a 9. What exists on Kimberly now is a 9-foot stretch to the back of walk from the curb, and it includes tree wells, and that is what is being proposed on the applicant's side of the street, and that would make it compatible with the neighborhood and consistent with what exists there now. My point in raising this issue here on the creek side is that just beyond this project limit, which is, I'll show it here. From this point on, there's an existing sidewalk all the way north down the stretch. So I'm just questioning whether that is the intent to say stop the sidewalk here and don't have a sidewalk on this side of the street when we have an existing sidewalk all the way down the street on both sides beyond this project.
I agree completely, and I think your logic is flawless. If you can come up with a revised Kimberly plan that gets as much creek bank and habitat in the lower part of Kimberly as there is in the upper area going towards the hostel that accommodates the sidewalk, I would certainly be willing to consider a sidewalk down there. But given how constrained the space is, you know, I wouldn't want to put pedestrians at risk on a narrow sidewalk between traffic from a new development and a steep vertical wall on the other side. I think the city's risk manager would raise a red flag about that.
That slide back up. Just to clarify, the existing condition does not have a sidewalk that runs the length of Kimberly on that west side. There is, as Mr. Wozniak just mentioned, about where that dotted line crosses the street, there's an existing sidewalk up there, and then there's no sidewalk on the creek bank all the way down to the bridge. And so there is something of a sloped bank that is the existing condition there.
I think we need to move forward and get some kind of motion here to have staff write up this letter for us, unless there's any final additions or changes to what he's read off to us.
Madam Chair, I would move that the committee convey a written statement to HLC and to the project applicant, the Public Works Department, enumerating the 8.5 issues of concern expressed by the staff, the half being Mr. Casevier's addition to the list that Mr. Benson read to us.
For a second.
Or second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to move on now to 8B, a report from George Thompson on the Laguna Channel and Mission Lagoon Restoration Project. Thank you, John.
Good evening, committee and chair members, liaison members here with us tonight, and members of the public. My name is George Thompson. I work in the Creeks Division, and I'm here representing a team of city staff that are working on this new project for the city, the Creeks Division, which is in Parks and Rec Department, the Parks and Recreation Department, and also Waterfront and the Public Works Department are involved in this project. It's a new project, and so tonight I'm going to be taking you through a little bit of background, history of the project, where we are right now, and where we hope to go. This is the Mission Lagoon and Laguna Channel Restoration Project. I thought I would start by just pointing out where exactly in the city we're going to be doing our design and planning work, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with this area. It's pretty much ground central, Santa Barbara, right at Mission Creek Lagoon and Laguna Channel on East Beach next to Stearns Wharf. We have three components of the project, which I'll talk about in detail in just a moment, but this is essentially where most of the focus will be. So what has been done to date? Over the past 18 months or so, we've been busy reaching out to the public and setting the project goals with various interest groups. We met with the Greater Santa Barbara Lodging and Restaurant Association, the Chamber of Commerce, environmental groups, EDC, Heal the Ocean, Channel Keeper, Audubon Society, and then we also hosted several public forums, including one of the Creeks Advisory Committee meetings. We did a site visit. We also held a public forum at the site and walked through some of the background of the project. And from those various meetings, we developed a set of project goals, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So we got all of that input. I put together, with the help of other city staff, a request for proposals that went out to over 200 potential candidate firms throughout the nation. And these are environmental consulting and engineering firms that do this type of work. We received 6 proposals, and it was a range of proposals. And basically, for those of you that aren't familiar with the process, we selected the top candidates based solely on their qualifications. We couldn't look at the cost, and actually we couldn't even ask for the cost from all of the candidate firms. And this is according to state law and choosing a design firm. And so we reviewed the proposals and interviewed 3 of the top firms and chose across the board, everybody agreed this firm is the best. And it's a firm called ESA PWA. They're based up in San Francisco. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them in just a moment. So right now we got a cost estimate from that firm, and we're negotiating both the scope of work, what they're actually going to be doing on this project, as well as how much it's going to cost. And I just want to point out that we don't have any plans for the project yet, and that's really why I'm here tonight, is for the committee to make a recommendation to City Council to authorize a professional services contract for this work to move forward. And we hope to go to the City Council in March next month. Okay, so getting back to the project goals, we have 4 overarching essential things that we want to accomplish with this project, namely improve water quality, improve native plant and wildlife habitat, improve the aesthetics, and improve or at least maintain the current flood protection in the project area. Now, if you take those 4 main project goals and frame them within these 4 additional goals that are really, I would consider them the constraints or the framework where we could accomplish those first 4 goals. Protect the surrounding infrastructure. There's a lot of different uses that happen down there and a lot of built infrastructure. There's a lot of different people that go down there for different reasons, and we want to maintain and support those existing uses. We don't want to exclude, say, bike users from the bike path. We want to ensure public safety in whatever design that we come up with. And then we also want to ensure consistency with the projects that have either already been built or planned to be built, or in addition to the plans, that meaning general plan, local coastal plan, some of the policies and laws that govern this specific area. And there's also various plans that the city must adhere to, such as the Tidewater Gobi Management Plan, which was a condition of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project. And so, in short, there's a lot of stuff that we need to conform with in designing this project. Let's step back about 160 years in Santa Barbara history. And many people in this area don't realize that at one point, we're just going to dim the lights for clarity here. There was at one time a large estuary that covered the eastern portion of Santa Barbara. Now, you can think of this as similar to a Carpinteria salt marsh or a Goleta slough. And in this map from 1853, you can see the outline of the open water. It was called El Estero. You can see Mission Creek here, a little bit southwest, and at that time it was called Arroyo del Pedregoso, or Rocky Creek. And then this darker area was the outline of wetland vegetation, so things like tules and salt marsh vegetation that flooded seasonally. Now, the wetland at that time provided a lot of functions in terms of flood protection. You would have a low area that would flood and contain those floodwaters. You would have what are now important commercial fisheries, such as halibut, using that area as spawning ground. Southern steelhead were very abundant at that time. But if you go from 1853, I think most people know the story that as Santa Barbara got built out, that wetland got filled in. And a big event that contributed to that was the 1925 earthquake in Santa Barbara. They had a lot of rubble and a big open wetland to dump it into. And so they did that, and a lot of the wetland was lost, and a lot of the functions that I just mentioned were lost, or at least greatly reduced to the wetland that ended up after they did that. This big oval here is a racetrack. You can see here there's a lumber yard actually on the beach. And this photo is interesting because it shows the spur on Stearns Wharf. Well, that spur actually connected at one time to a railroad that connected with the main railroad line, went right across the estuary and what is now Laguna Channel. Here you can see Mission Creek has been channelized to go back around the lumber yard and exit further to the east. and the estuary has basically been reduced to this small channel, and then assumedly got routed straight out to the Pacific. Now, if you go forward another 70 to 80 years, you can see here Mission Creek on the left, Laguna Channel on the right. At this time period, the city actually bulldozed a mechanical opening to allow Mission Creek to flow directly into the Pacific, and also the same for Laguna Channel. And you don't see the lagoon here, which nowadays forms and spills out in the ocean somewhere in between this area. So 2004, you can see the lagoon, and something happened. Well, the regulatory agencies in the state basically said, City of Santa Barbara, you can't mechanically breach the lagoon anymore. It's bad for the endangered species that use that area for habitat and spawn and reproduce in that wetland. So now the management is more hands-off. We don't do a active mechanical breaching of the lagoon. 2008, you can see from 2004 to 2008, it has a different footprint. You can see, I'll get into what this structure is for those of you that don't know. This is probably typically during a summer period where you get a larger footprint of the lagoon. You can see some of the water quality issues even from this far off distance, a lot of algae. And this basically compresses that story that I just told into 2 slides. Here on the right, you can see El Estero, and then superimposed on it, current day Santa Barbara. Now, the blue is the open water of that historic El Estero, and then the green is that wetland vegetation I talked about. The yellow are dunes and beach strand, as well as the orange coloring there. Now, I want to be clear that this project is not proposing to restore the historic lagoon in area, but really what we're looking at doing is taking advantage of the lagoon that is left on the beach and restoring some of those functions. So lagoons recharge groundwater, they restrict saltwater intrusion into our freshwater supplies, they mitigate the effects of urban runoff, they provide habitat, and so we're working with a much reduced footprint but trying to maximize those functions. Now, there are several other projects that we need to be aware of that the city has in various stages of development and construction. And I'll start with the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project because the last agenda item dealt a lot with the channelization of Lower Mission Creek and the estuary there. And a portion of that has already been built, and so they've widened and deepened the estuary north of State Street. And so it's about 50% bigger there. And primarily that was for flood control conveyance. The Cabrillo Bridge replacement is another project that's slated to happen, and this is Cabrillo Bridge at Mission Creek. And also there's an ongoing maintenance program called the Waterfront Sediment Management Plan. It's a joint project between the Army Corps of Engineers and the city's waterfront department and the Parks and Recreation Department. And essentially what they do is keep this channel free of sediment, basically sand that is in the longshore current, comes around the harbor, and basically drops out and plugs up the harbor. So this is an ongoing maintenance effort where they pump sand, dredge it out, and get it downshore where it can get picked up again by the longshore current. And then, of course, here's the project that we're talking about. So each of these projects affects the project that we're talking about in various ways, and the 2 public works projects have required mitigation, environmental mitigation, restoration to mitigate the impacts that are caused by construction. And one of those mitigation areas is just downstream of the Cabrillo Bridge. They're going to widen and deepen the lagoon here, and then increase the amount of native vegetation here. So basically do some native plantings. And this is a plan that's already been approved by the various city oversight committees and the Coastal Commission. This is essentially extending that effort for the impacts associated with the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project. So these 4 colored areas are areas that we're not proposing to change. It's already been set in the plans that have been approved. The Waterfront Department every winter builds a large sand berm here, and this is part of their permitted activities for the sediment management plan. And really the goal of this is to get Mission Creek to outlet further to the east. The problem with it coming out here is that when you get a big storm, it washes out and tends to erode the pilings of Stearns Wharf, and it also deposits a lot of refuse and garbage into the harbor. And interestingly, when this was permitted, this action, it was actually permitted with the hope that this would create one lagoon by diverting Mission Creek to the east, which would then benefit the endangered tidewater goby. The blue area is really our main design area that we're proposing for this project. And so it's basically picking up where others have left off on their designs and trying to meld those two. And so that's the main design area, but there are others that I'll talk about. Okay, let me just talk quickly a little bit. Let me summarize about Mission Lagoon. It is a dynamic environment. It's basically water on sand. There's not a real hard structure that determines its footprint year in, year out, but there are forces that shape it, whether it be that longshore current that I talked about, storm action from the ocean, or the amount of runoff that we're getting from our mountains and valleys in large storm events. We also need to be clear that the Mission Lagoon is not disconnected from the estuary, which has typically been that section of Mission Creek north of Cabrillo Boulevard. They're the same water body, and that goes up to Chapala Yananali. For some reason, the area south of Cabrillo Boulevard has traditionally been called Mission Lagoon, but they are similar. You'll have tidewater gobies in both habitats. You'll have southern steelhead migrating through both the lagoon and estuary. They are unique habitats because it's saltwater and freshwater mixing, and there's only a certain suite of species that can tolerate that potentially traumatic environment. And two of those species are endangered. And part of the reason that they're endangered is because their habitat has been diminished by water quality issues, by loss of aerial extent. And the water quality issues that are most obvious to most folks in Santa Barbara is the smell and the algae. And those are really caused by excess nutrients. And we also have a lot of bacteria that gets into our waterway there and eventually washes out into the ocean. But regardless of the negative aspects of Mission Lagoon, it is still a premier destination. If you can stand down there on a sunny day, there are busloads of tourists, thousands of residents that use the area, but in short, it could be better. Here's just a quick slide of some data that the Creeks Division has collected over the 8 years between 2001 and 2009. And essentially what it says is at certain times of the year, the lagoon is closed, meaning a beach area is disconnecting it from the ocean. It forms its own water body. And at certain times of the year, it's open. It's a free-flowing lagoon to the ocean. Now, when the lagoon is closed, the water quality on the beach tends to be better than when the lagoon is connected to the beach. And one possibility or one mechanism for that happening is the sand berm creates a filter to filter out a lot of the enterococcus, which is basically a bacteria that causes or is an indicator for human illness from stormwater runoff. Now, if you focus in on Mission Creek at East Beach, when the lagoon is open to the ocean, it is over 5 times more likely to exceed the state standards, health standards set for that level of bacteria. And so this obviously will focus in on our design efforts. How can we improve water quality both when the lagoon is closed and when it's open? Here's the pipe that delivers sediment from the harbor down to the further end of East Beach. And this happens, you'll see the pipe being laid about every other year or 3 years, depending on how they structure their contract. But that area basically turns into a temporary construction zone. And so one of the efforts of the project is, can we design it in such a way that we don't need to disturb that habitat every 3 years? Here's a great photo of community effort and attention to the lagoon. There's a lot of people in our community that care about this habitat, come and spend a Saturday morning picking up garbage that washes from the upstream areas of Santa Barbara down to the beach. And there are other people that access the beach, and this is pretty much their access route. They run across the bike path, the multimodal path there, and come out onto the dunes and stand, take a photo, go down in the water, muck around, and look around. Now, one of the design efforts here is how can we improve this access? How can we improve the natural history story that can be told for this important part of the city? If you look, this green vegetation in the foreground is non-native called ice plant. Many of you are probably familiar with it. This is also important habitat in that there's a lot of California native plants that are native to dune habitats that are being lost throughout the state. So this is an opportunity to restore those. And just as an aside, those plants are similar in structure and height as ice plants. So you wouldn't lose those potential views. Okay, let's jump over to the east, Laguna Channel Pump Station and tie gates. Remember, this is the historic estuary that's basically been narrowed down to a flood control channel that still has some elements of native habitat and habitat for endangered species. But first and foremost, today it serves as a critical flood control facility managed by the City Public Works Department. The Parks and Recreation Department also has a small arts center on the bank of Laguna Channel. One of the real challenging aspects of this project is going to be the very low gradient that goes from more or less where my office is down on Laguna Street out to the ocean. You're trying to move a lot of water over a very shallow landscape. And so the tide gates and pump station make that possible. But is there a way to do that that would be more efficient or at least create better habitat while still maintaining that flood control capacity? And then the Creeks Division has also done extensive water quality monitoring, as we have done in the lagoon, and the story is the same. There's polluted water that we need to clean up. First and foremost, though, on this portion of the project, we really need to maintain that existing flood control capacity because it's critical for the residents and businesses that are housed and operate out of that lower eastern portion of Santa Barbara. Here's an aerial overview. The tide gates here basically restrict the influence of the estuary from going upstream in the channel. So there's a disconnect between this body of water and this body of water, the lagoon. Here's the pump station, sucks water up through a series of pumps and then ejects it out and around the tide gates. And here's the concrete channel and the discharge channel. Here's the Arts and Crafts Center built right on the top of the bank. And here's the Cabrillo Arts Center. I just included this because this is not within the design footprint. We're not touching or looking at moving or doing anything with this building. Sorry, Chase Palm Park Center. I mislabeled that. Okay, here's a ground view of the Laguna Channel, the pump station in the mid-ground there, and then this is the Arts and Crafts Center at the back there. You can see both of these structures are built right on the top of Laguna Channel. You can see the relatively poor habitat that's here, and this facility is in need of both repair and or replacement. Here you can see the channel walls are degrading, mostly due to age and the ground squirrel population there. You can see some native vegetation here. This is California tule. And then in the background there, we've got a pretty decent riparian canopy with sycamores and oaks and various other large trees. Here's from the beach looking at the tide gate structure. So this is the area that restricts the lagoon from entering up into Laguna Channel. So this is on the very eastern part of the project, down at this short arrow and looking up here. Now, I want to jump all the way over to the far western portion of the project. We're going to skip over the Lower Mission Creek flood control project because that's already been planned and there are designs that are being constructed right now for that, so we're not touching that. But if you jump up to the train station here, Mission Creek goes from a natural bottom to this historic channel, which has a concrete bottom. And this area is going to be part of our design effort and study area. There is a bridge that's being designed by Public Works. We're not doing that portion of the project. That's a different project. But we are looking at the connection between the estuary and this section of Mission Creek. This is if you were to stand on the Chapala-Yananali Bridge looking downstream towards the beach. There is a concrete sill, which is the beginning of that concrete channel, which is at a higher elevation than the estuary. And so we were looking at, is it feasible to remove this concrete and expand the estuary and habitat up into this historic area? Now, one of the constraints in this area is these sandstone walls are historic, so we're not proposing to touch those, but we may need to, if we remove this concrete, build a better footing so that those concrete sandstone walls don't wash downstream. So there is a fair amount of engineering analysis and technical work that's going to be needed on this portion of the project. But you could have a substantial increase in estuary habitat if it's feasible technically. Okay, so those are the three main areas: Mission Lagoon, Laguna Channel, and then the Railroad Depot Channel. And whatever design that comes out of this process, these are the questions that really need to be answered. What improvements can be made that restores habitat, improves water quality, maintains or improves flood control, creates a welcoming public space because it is such a popular area of Santa Barbara? How can it complement the existing and planned projects for the area? Will it be adapted to the dynamic nature of this environment, both the creek water that's coming downstream as well as the ocean waters that are coming upstream? How can we create a project that's not going to be static but can move with those forces of nature? And then, of course, we need to design a project that is realistic in terms of getting funded and getting permitted. We can't go out and design everybody's wildest dream project. We really need to stay focused in reality. And this is really the design process that we're working with, laying out with our chosen consultant, ESA PWA. They're going to basically do 3 stages here. The first stage is create an existing conditions report, which is where they do a whole suite of technical studies that I'll go into detail, and they can form the constraints and opportunities of the project area. From that constraint and opportunity analysis, they generate a conceptual design. And so by conceptual design, I mean, if you have a final design that you can actually go out and construct, that's 100%. We're talking about the 10 to 15% where you're not going down a path that you're going to get shut down because some technical issue. You're really forming a very initial stage. So we take that conceptual design, we hold public review meetings, we'll do a community forum. I'll probably be back here before the committee to explain what the conceptual design is all about. We take all of that input and then put that input into a preliminary design as long as it meets those 8 project goals that I mentioned in the beginning. And then, again, we do the technical analysis, run the models again to make sure that it works feasibly, technically, and then go out and do another public review. So this contract that we're talking about will take us to about 35%, and then we stop and then start up another design process in the future. So that first step is really the front-end loaded effort where we're doing a lot of technical studies, wave run-up studies, hydraulic analysis, hydrodynamic modeling, and it's basically getting the answer, how does this system work and what can we design within the constraints and opportunities of this dynamic system. There's also structural assessments that need to happen with the existing structures. What condition are they in? Do they need to be moved, repaired? Basically answering what is happening beneath the surface on these structures. We need to look at hazardous materials assessment. There's been a long history of land use. Are there hazardous materials that we'll need to eventually deal with if we excavate? There's a number of cultural resources that are already identified in other city reports. The arts and crafts building is one potential issue that we'll need to deal with. Those sandstone walls on the railroad channel that I talked about. So we can put all of those technical outputs into this conceptual model that can then generate an idea of, well, what is actually possible and what can we answer with an engineering design and technically answer versus what is not possible. So step 2 is then the conceptual design. We're going to develop one conceptual design driven by the site constraints and opportunities, and this will include concept plans and architectural renderings. And we want to do both so that if you're a layperson that's never seen an engineering plan, we want to have a picture from a human's perspective looking out at the site and saying, okay, this is what it might look like in the future based on this conceptual plan. But we also have a whole lot of technical evaluation on the specific elements of that project so that we ensure that we meet those 8 project objectives. And then there will be a very preliminary cost estimate on, hey, is this thing going to be actually built anytime in our lifetimes? And then, of course, underlining all of this are the community forums and public outreach to make sure that the members of the public and the community that value and cherish this area have an input on the design. Then this third stage, of course, is the preliminary design. We'll run through a refined conceptual design, run that through the engineering analysis again, and end up with those 35% plans, refine the cost estimates where we have more details that we can put in to find out what this thing is actually going to cost. And then the consultant is going to basically do an implementation plan to say, okay, if you're going to build this, what is the most logical way to build it? And then another round of public review and input. So this is the breakdown of the consultant team. It's 7 different firms that have various specialties and expertise that we're taking advantage of. The principal consultant is ESA PWA, as I mentioned. RRM Design is the landscape architect. Weston Solutions are the water quality and sediment quality specialists. Coastal Restoration Consultants is a local firm that's very experienced in both dune habitat, beach ecology, and wetland habitats. Fugro is also a local firm. They'll help us with our geotechnical engineering and hazardous materials assessments. And then Noble Consultants will do the structural assessments of the bridges, the buildings that are on the property. And then Phil King is a professor up at San Francisco State, I believe, or University of San Francisco, and he'll do the economics and cost-benefit analysis of this project. Now, this is a breakdown of how each of those work products pencils out according to the proposed design costs that the consultant gave us. And I just want to put an asterisk on that we're still in negotiation. So this is their starting point. Basically, what I'm doing now is working with all the other city staff that are involved in, and asking them and going through our records saying, what work has the city already done that we don't need to duplicate? And we can deduct that from the cost. There will be some costs associated with the consultant compiling that information and putting it into their model, but we don't need to rewrite the whole book, essentially. And so that task 1 is the technical analysis and constraints analysis, $241,000. That's where the bulk of the hard work is, the engineering analysis and the biological studies and cultural studies and so forth. $200,000 for a conceptual design and the proof of concept for them to run that concept through the engineering analysis again. $200,000 for the preliminary design. They've included a couple optional tasks, $33,000 for the regulatory compliance strategy. That's a document that is a recommendation on how to best deal with the permits that we'll need to get. And then the economic analysis, which basically tries to assign a dollar value to the habitats that we're trying to create. Now, we've already had some discussion, and I think the consensus among the city team is let's cut those optional tasks out because we really need to focus on getting the real project designed. And I'm pretty comfortable with the regulatory compliance. That's part of my job duty, so we don't need to pay somebody else to do that. And then there's another $7,500 or so for reimbursable expenses and equipment usage, which is definitely reasonable. So we're looking at about $650,000 as our starting point for negotiation. And like I said, we hope to get south of there. The range that I've given the committee is $100,000 between $600,000 and $700,000. But like I said, we hope to end up closer to $600,000. This is the timeline. We hope to go to council next month and get authorized to hire the firm. I hope that by April they'll be on the ground beginning work, doing the existing conditions report, which I anticipate will take about 12 months because of the number of analyses they'll need to do and modeling. The conceptual plan, 6 to 8 months, and the preliminary plan, 6 to 8 months. And then you have to remember working in the public review process to that timeline as well, which I didn't include here. While that's happening, I'll be applying for any grants that are out there. And then once we get the preliminary plan, we'll kick off the permitting and environmental review process. And then sometime in the future, I don't know when, we hope to get to the final design. Here's my contact information. I assume everybody on the committee has it, but for those of you at home, if you have a question about this project or a comment, please either call me or email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Are there any questions from the committee before we move to public comment? Ms. Lomas?
Yes, thank you. I have several. Or more comments rather than questions. When you're...
If we could wait on comment and do the public comment
okay,
first. Sure. Is that all right?
Then my question is, what is the status of the restoration on the tributary behind the sewer plant that goes into Laguna
Sure,
Channel?
let me pull up a slide so that...
I remember there was some talk about it a couple
Right,
years
so
ago.
this is, Ms. Lomas, I believe you're referring to this small tributary wetland to Laguna Channel. My understanding is the wastewater folks in the city just went to council and got approved for a environmental consultant to do a restoration plan for that area. And I believe that happened last week or 2 weeks ago. So there is movement on it. And our intention now is to try to coordinate with those folks to make sure that whatever plans they have will again meld with our restoration plan.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, we do have one member of the public that would like to speak, Eddie Harris.
Hello again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Eddie Harris for Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council. And I just want to say that we think that this project will benefit the biology and the aesthetics of the waterfront and will likely help to improve water quality. And in addition, it will help increase awareness of the causes for pollution and pollution prevention, leading to cleaner creeks and oceans and better conditions for the beachgoers and for wildlife. It'll help to attract the tourists to the waterfront and to Santa Barbara, and it'll be a positive influence to both the creeks and to our economy. Just those brief comments, and that we do support this effort, and we hope to see a successful restoration take place in the not too distant future on the waterfront. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Moldaver?
Madam Chair, before we move into committee comments, I just wanted to note that we did receive 2 emails from members of the public who couldn't be here tonight, and I've provided copies to each of you. It's on they're on either side of a sheet of paper. One comment from Brian Troutwine and one comment from Paul Bullock, and these comments have been distributed to everyone on the committee. They will also be part of the record from the hearing. Okay, thank you.
Moldaver?
I've got two brief unrelated questions. The first is, I noticed in the audience someone with exceptional knowledge and experience in coastal planning, and I was wondering whether there were any comments from that source at this time. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Because it's always good to see someone of that stature here at our meetings. My smaller, simpler question to the staff is, for the benefit of the people at home, could you identify where in our budget our support for this is listed, and whether we've already identified? You mentioned applying for some grants. Have we already identified some funds? Because I'm sure that's going to be one of the first things that our friends on the City Council are going to ask us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Moldaver, over the last several years, this project has been programmed into the Creeks Division Capital Improvement Program. It's part of our 6-year capital improvement program. We have been setting aside funds for this each year for the last 2 years. We have funds programmed to go into next year's budget or proposed for next year's budget. So there's sufficient funds in the Creeks Division Capital Program for this project. We also have been actively researching grants. We had a significant grant application into the Department of Water Resources for a program that is focused on flood control and wildlife habitat enhancement. And so we thought that was a good fit. We just received a denial for that application. I think a large part of the denial is just we're at such a preliminary stage in this project, and if we're competing against projects that have their design work done and have their engineering analysis complete, they just are much more competitive. So those grants some of those grants will continue to be available through, there was Proposition 1E, which was a flood control bond measure that was on the ballot and passed by the voters of California, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and then also Proposition 84, which was passed in 2006, which provides funding for this type of project. So as we have the additional information and we're actually a little further along in this project, I think we'll be much more competitive.
Madam Chair, I found that a compelling and persuasive answer, and therefore I would like to move that the committee recommend to the council that they contract with the identified consultants contingent on reaching agreement on the price schedule for the services to move forward with the next phase of these 3 different related projects.
Is there a second for that? Okay.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you very much. And we will be adjourning this meeting at 7:37.
Move.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
Ms. Lemus?
I did have some fun with that.
No, I think there's always time for good comments that might bring in an alternate or substitute motion, depending on how interesting they are.
I just wanted to mention that when you, for the project background, on the project background, you had the meetings with all the communities, interest groups. I would highly recommend somewhere along the process you would also have a meeting with the permitting agencies to find out early on what is permittable and what is not permittable. It may save you money and effort in the long run, if you're going to propose something that the agencies would not agree with.
Would you be willing to give some examples of agencies just to make sure our staff is aware of what you have in mind?
Well, in this case, it would be NOAA Fisheries, of course, Fish and Wildlife Service, because they list the Tidewater Goby, Fish and Game, and I believe the Regional Water Quality Control Board would be the agency, and the Coastal Commission.
And the Army Corps of Engineers.
And the Army Corps of Engineers.
And the City of
Yes.
Santa Barbara.
There's tons of them.
There are actually 7 different permitting agencies because of the complexity and the sensitivity of this type of ecosystem and this location. So it's we are aware of that. It's sometimes, and we have done and will continue to reach out to those agencies for that purpose. The challenge in doing that is those agencies are so strapped for resources that allowing staff to help advise at a preliminary level for this type of project is just a challenge for the agencies. But we will continue to try to do that outreach so that we don't overlook any kind of permitting issue going forward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Smith.
Madam Chair, I was wondering whether Committee Member Lomas's questions and concerns were so strong that it would prevent her from continuing to support the motion that was just approved.
I think we have one more question
Okay.
as well.
Right, I'll support the motion too. I just wanted to echo our committee member Paul Bullock's concerns that he expressed in the email, or just his comments, and that I think a lot of the public would share, and that you referenced at the beginning of your presentation that the beach is great, but it could be a lot better without the stink and the algae. And so I think you referenced one way that being concerned about the water quality is going to help alleviate that concern, and that you said there are excess nutrients. And so I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or our engineers will figure it out, and that if we get the habitat more healthy, that it's going to naturally reduce the amount of algae and thus the green that we see and the smell on the beach.
Yes, there's two things that we're talking about here. One is upstream of the project area, and the Creeks Division does a number of things to alleviate the water quality issues upstream of this project that are flowing to the project site. Within the project site itself, we're looking to our consultants to recommend a schedule of fixes, whether it be technological or more natural habitat based, but look at all the options and generate a prescription for this site, essentially. But yes, water quality is one of the main objectives of improving on this project.
That's great. I look forward to hearing more about the report. And my only other comment would be, you said Dr. King on the consultant team you think is from San Francisco. I don't know him at all, but if he is, do you know if he has any local ties to the community? Because if he's doing a cost benefit analysis, certainly most of the benefits are rooted locally, and so you would want someone who's familiar with the area to be doing that.
Right. He is a sub-consultant for the main consultant, ESA PWA, and with the work that he's done with them, I know that he's done a lot of work for the city of San Francisco, and I believe he worked on the Surfers Point project at the city of Ventura, but I'll have to double check on that. But really what he's doing is more of an economist approach to what we're trying to put on the ground here. And so there are certain local values that he needs to include in his economic model, but I think it's kind of a standardized approach to environmental valuation that he's doing.
Thank you.
And yes, Mr. Benson just did remind me that a lot of his work is on the optional task that we've already decided we're going to cut to try to get to the nuts and bolts of this project.
I just wanted to say something about the cost. I think Mr. Thompson stated that the the total amount that was presented as part of the budget was the starting point, and I think that there's a little bit more to that. I think the original proposal. What was the amount?
It was well over 700,000 was their first submittal to us, and then basically they went back to their subconsultants and revised downward based on additional information that they had gathered through the interview process, through subsequent talks with the city, and so we've gone from 746,000 or so, I believe, down to 680, down to 650, and so we're continually trying to edge downwards, but still get the real work products that we need to design a project.
Madam Chair, as part of my motion to adjourn, I want to recognize the great work you've done filling in at the last moment for our chair. And I'd also like to ask our staff whether the proposed March 14th hearing day would be at the Gebhardt Room, or would that necessitate us meeting here again? Okay. Yeah, thank you. But I do move to adjourn.
And just for the record, because I don't think a microphone was on, we need to confirm meeting space. This was something we just found out about recently. So hopefully one of those two locations is available.
To be determined.
And we'll provide public noticing on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Move to adjourn.
There's a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?